Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the USDA Farm Service Agency briefing, specifically for specialty crop stakeholders and high-value crop stakeholders related to the Supplemental Disaster Relief Program Stage 2 that was recently announced. My name is Jamie White. I'm currently serving as your Acting Deputy Administrator for Farm Programs here at the Farm Service Agency. I have the honor and privilege of lifting up and supporting farm and conservation programs for America's farmers, ranchers, and growers. We're very excited to be here with you all today and excited to announce that we are rolling out the final wave of supplemental relief authorized by the American Relief Act 2025. We know that nobody more than you and the producers and growers that you serve are anxious to be part of this discussion. I will share that we have a packed agenda this afternoon. The team has put together a very intuitive and thoughtful presentation specific to the specialty crop and high value crop industry. So we will plan on using the full hour, if not bumping over it just a little bit as well. I would like to share just a couple of housekeeping items for the broader group today. All lines will be muted for the duration of the call. We will be recording this session to be posted online on our FSA landing page specific to the Supplemental Relief Program pages as well. Additionally, we will monitor the questions and answers in the chat. There may be some of those question and answers that we'll be able to address in the live session. However, at the conclusion of today's stakeholder briefing, we will capture all questions and answers in a written format and ensure that those are also published on FSA's Supplemental Relief landing page as well. With that, I would like to turn the floor over to our administrator, Mr. Bill Beam, for opening comments. Thank you, Bill. The floor is yours, sir.
Okay, well, thank you, Jamie, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I want to say how much I want to say that we appreciate you all joining us. We value our stakeholders, obviously, and we're hoping that you can spread the message and help this much needed relief for losses for 23 and 24 get out to our producers in hopefully a timely fashion. We have a lot of details for you today. This program is maybe a little more complicated than some, but there's reasons that we have done it that way. That being said, we have made it as simple as possible. But there is a bit of a process that they're going to have to go through. So appreciate you taking time to be with us today. I also wanted to say thank you to all of our staff that helped develop this program. Many of them have worked endless hours on this, some of them during government shutdown, and they were even working weekends during government shutdown. So I want to publicly say thank you to them for all the time and effort they put into it. Lastly, and not least, I want to also thank our county offices. They do an amazing job for us. They have been doing training. They're getting training actually last week, right after shutdown was over. We started training, and they are now ready to take those appointments so that we can get those producers in the office and get them signed up for this relief program that is ready to roll out. So with that, I'm not going to delay anymore. I'm going to kick it over to Kathy Sayer, Head of Safety Net Division. So Kathy.
Thanks, Bill. So good afternoon. We are excited to finally bring you the Supplemental Disaster Relief Program Stage 2 training. I'm Kathy Sayers. I'm the Division Director for the Safety Net Division. As Bill said, the Safety Net Division is the one that develops all of the farm programs under the Deputy Administrator for Farm Programs that deal with any type of disaster, livestock or crop, as well as, the common provisions in the ART PLC program. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. I know that a lot of you have probably heard how huge this program is or how difficult it may be, but what we have tried to dedicate our time to is making it as seamless and simple as possible for the producer. Any data that is already on file with FSA or RMA, we're trying to utilize that data where it would prevent the producer from having to rehash the information that they've already provided to one agency or the other through their crop insurance agent or through their county office. And as we go into the details, Chris Vasquez, the section head for the disaster assistance section, will be talking specifically about the types of information that the producer will be required to provide. So starting with the SDRP program, as you know, it was authorized under the American Relief Act of 2025, which was signed back in December of last year of 2024. We rolled out the first part in July. Overall, there was $30.78 billion in disaster assistance. That went to multiple programs. 16.09 billion of that has been allocated for the supplemental relief, both stage 1 and stage 2. Same as stage 1, but just another important note. We have 4 block grant states where USDA is working with the states of Connecticut, Hawaii, Maine, and Massachusetts to create their own crop disaster program. It was their election to operate their own crop disaster program. So in order to prevent duplicate benefits, SDRP is not available to producers that reside in those states for the land that is physically located in those states. There are other states that we are also developing block grants with that are not operating a crop disaster program. So there's like 12 other states that we're working with for block grants. SDRP is available for producers in those states. It's only the 4 that named here where SDRP is not available. Linkage, same rules as stage 1. The producer will be required to purchase coverage at a 6,100 coverage level or higher, and that's the combination of the coverage level and price election. It has to equate to a 6,100 coverage level. An overview of stage 2. As we go through this, you're going to hear, of the multiple parts, the multiple things or types of losses that we're covering and coverage types of insurance that we're covering. And it's all based on the type of coverage that each individual producer has. And you'll hear more specifically as we get into that. But to simplify it for a producer, they need to think about their own operation, because if you look at the program as a whole or the entire application process, it can be overwhelming. But if you limit it down to your type of operation and the specific types of coverage that you have or losses that you have, you can simplify it then and then see the application pieces that you will need to complete when you're working with your county office. And again, we'll go into more specifics later on. But overall, the insured crops with shallow losses, so those that are non-indemnified, are eligible for stage 2. And we break it down into categories. And the reason we break it down into categories is because of the data that is available to pre-fill on the applications or the data that we would need from a producer. And so the categories of the insured crops are APH and yield-based plans, area plans, dollar plans and other revenue, value loss, and trees and vines. And then on the NAP side, we divide it into yield-based and value loss, but it's further separated into whether or not they have an approved application for payment or they do not have an approved application for payment. And again, Chris will be going over that in more detail. Stage 2 introduces uninsured losses. So all producers that do not have coverage on specific crops or overall on their operation will be eligible to apply in stage 2 for yield-based crops, value loss, and trees, bushes, and vines. And then Puerto Rico was not included in our indemnified losses or in stage 1 at all. So Puerto Rico losses will be included for indemnified, non-indemnified, and trees, bushes, and vines holistically. So we will include the insured pieces for Puerto Rico producers as part of the stage 2 process. Quality losses, which is a big component of stage 2. If you'll remember back, if you've participated in FSA programs, For years now, you know that we have normally conducted a quality loss program separately from a disaster program. This one was built into stage 2. And then we will also have a stage 1 component, which will be rolled out in early 2026. But we are incorporating quality losses for stage 2 for those non-indemnified producers. And quality is going to be eligible for your yield-based crops and also for those insured dollar plans and other revenue policies. Sign up began yesterday, November the 24th. The FSA 504 is the SDRP stage 2 application. On our stage 1 and 2 deadlines, a deadline has been set and it was publicized in the Federal Register or federal regulation that was published. The application deadline is going to be April 30th of 2026 for both stage 1 and stage 2. If you will remember, there is for payment eligibility, there's multiple forms that have to be provided to the county office in order to receive payment or to receive that increase in payment limitation. And those forms are all required by no later than April 30th of 2027. It's a year after the enrollment date. There will be some records that are required from producers at the time of application, whether that's production, inventory, or quality records to document the quality loss factors. Those records are not always required. It depends on what you're applying for, what type of loss, whether or not you're applying for quality, and what type of crop. So Chris will be going over each time further documentation is required. And then, of course, if a county committee requests additional documentation from a producer, they would have 60 days from that request to provide that documentation to support their claim for their SDRP application. So our schedule, because the program does have multiple parts as on the application, and to get enrollment started, there's a scheduled release time of when things are added. So yesterday, of course, like we said, enrollment started November 24th. And right now we have all insured, NAP covered, and uninsured crops that can be processed as far as the application process goes. So producers with those can come in today, apply, and we have the automated software to do so. In early December, we will be adding the insured and uninsured tree, bush, and vine, and also turning on payment. So payment processing should start by mid-December, as well as the tree, bush, and vine piece added to the application process. That stage 1 quality that we referred to earlier will begin in early 2026. We don't have a specific date yet, but that will be in very early in 2026, where those stage 1 producers, which were those indemnified losses, whether that's crop insurance or NAP, would be able to come in and apply for stage 1 quality. And then the last release will include the Puerto Rico insured crops, trees, bushes, and vines. For Puerto Rico producers, all crops that are either uninsured or NAP covered can come in today and apply just like in any other area or state. We have a lot of resources for SDRP, and the producer-facing website is listed here on this slide. Cassie is also going to pop it into our chat, so you can access the website. There's a lot of tools on the website, as well as a lot of information. There's the fact sheet is there, frequently asked questions, which will be continuously updated throughout the enrollment. So once we receive a lot of the same question, we'll make sure that it's on that FAQ document. RMA also utilizes the FAQ documents and also put them on their website. We have an at-a-glance card that I really want to point your attention to. That at-a-glance card is like a producer checklist, and it would prepare you for your appointment. So if you will take a look at the at-a-glance card and prepare for your appointment with the county office, that will help you prepare, and it will prevent so many trips to the county office. Since this call is dedicated to the specialty crop growers, and producers and organizations. I'm also going to pop into the chat a link to a fact sheet on acreage reporting, and it will help give you some ideas and tools of how to report acres, and specifically to specialty crops if you have any questions about that. Our program provisions were published in the Federal Register at 7 CFR Part 760 Subpart V. That will be all of the SDRP provisions. Our handbook is Handbook 1 SDRP. County offices have that in draft form right now. It will be published sometime next week. Because of the shutdown, we're a little behind on publicizing the handbook. So that should be available next week as well. And then before we go on, one thing that I did want to mention specifically, because we're concentrating on the specialty crop provisions right now. As we go through the training, going through each part, there's insurance products available, whether it's yield-based, area plan, value loss, all across the board, whether that's insured or NAP covered. So we are going to cover each piece for specialty crop growers, and it will be dependent on the type of coverage you have purchased. So as Chris goes through the different items, you'll be able to associate that with the type of coverage that you have purchased, and then understand how you're going to file the application with the county office. So now I'm going to turn it over to Chris Vasquez, the section head for our disaster assistance section.
Thanks, Kathy. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started on this. We've got quite a bit of material to cover and not a whole lot of time. So this stage 2 application we're looking at is going to be called an FSA 504, and it's going to contain 15 separate parts. Now we're going to go through down and break down each of the parts that is really more pertinent to you all in the specialty high value areas, which is probably most of the form. Honestly, there's we're not going to really do a deep dive into the tree, bush, and vine yet, but that's we're going to be rolling that out here come early December. But so to start off, the parts are separated. We've got it separated and bucketed into 3 parts: insured, NAP covered, and then uninsured. And then there's further categories broken down for each of those parts. Now, it is a lengthy form. It's got 15 separate parts to it. But the important thing to understand is that the only things that an individual producer are going to see are what is specific to them. So you may have producers that have a little bit of crop insurance, NAP, and maybe even some uninsured acres. And so the crop insurance, it's only going to populate for the areas that they have. So if they have a plan, like a yield type plan, it's part C will be the only thing they see on that form. If they have a value loss on their clams and they're covered by NAP, their only thing you're going to see is possibly what, if they had an approved application or not on the NAP side. And then the other one that's kind of the outlier is the uninsured. And so for the uninsured, that's really going to be more dictated by when the producer comes in and files the acreage report, because for the insured and the NAP, we're leveraging data that crop insurance or NAP, FSA already has on file for NAP to populate these forms. For the uninsured, the driver really is that acreage report. So it's going to be really important that anything that's uninsured, that those producers are getting established with FSA with their records, and then filing that acreage report. Once that acreage report is on file, that application will start to pull over the pertinent facts. So this is really important. Producers will need to contact the county offices to start making appointments and getting in there. There will be no manual applications that can be taken on this. Now we are posting to see what the application looks like along with form instructions, but that's really just for informational purposes only. There's so many different data sets that are coming into this application. It's would be very difficult for a producer to try to figure out what would go in each of these spots, because as we come through, you'll see there's a lot of different parts that are going to be pre-filled. And so that's why we cannot accept a manual application, and the producers will have to go into their county offices to complete that application process. And we encourage them start getting contact with these offices and making those appointments so they can get in there. Now, the first thing that we're going to go into is quality loss. And the reason for that is because we're going to talk about what quality loss is, how it applies between stage 1, stage 2, but also so that you have an understanding of when we say what a quality loss percentage is and how it applies within specific sections of the form. So the quality, we have the 2 stages. Stage 1, which is going to be in that later release sometime in early next year, is going to apply to insured APH or yield-based crops and NAP yield-based crops only. Now we're going to do a deeper dive into that when we get towards that release. But what we're focusing on today is stage 2. And what stage 2 does is it allows for quality adjustments to production for crop insurance, NAP, or even uninsured crops. And what we're going to do is a producer will be able to come by, determine what kind of quality loss they had, and they will figure that out as a percent loss. That will be 1% number that will be applied on the application. Now, as we go through this, you'll see there are calculations. We also have calculators that are available to assist with these calculations. Now, and these calculators are, I don't think they're posted there yet, but we will have them posted on our SDRP website so that the producers can access those if that's applicable to them. So where is it quality eligible? It's eligible on our insured APH crops, the insured dollar crops and other revenue, NAP yield crops, the uninsured yield, and then insured crops in Puerto Rico. So the theme that we want to pull off from these are crops that have production. If they are a value loss crop, so your clams, your oysters, your food fish, your ornamental fish, those are value loss crops, and those are inventory. So there is no quality that's assessed to those. The way those work is if there's any value now or in the future, it's assessed at full value. So there, you can't look at a quality reduction in the same way that you have on production. So quality doesn't apply in those value loss scenarios. Same thing on tree, bush, and vine. There is no quality there. The tree is either dead or damaged. If it's dead, then it's gone. If it's damaged, it has a different factor that's applied to it. And so there is no quality that applies on a tree, bush, and vine. It only applies on your production-based crops. Now, it's ineligible on your insured area plans. Your area plans are going to be like your crops, like apiculture, through crop insurance, PRF, annual forage. But these are plans that do not pay on an individual producer's level of production. They're based on what's going on in an area within inside of a grid, and that's how the loss is calculated. Now, when we talk about our quality loss, that quality loss is based on a single, well, not a single, but on a unit for that crop. So there's a 1% that applies against that production. That's why you can't apply it on those area plans. It's also not going to be eligible for crops that already had quality loss that are already compensated with stage 1 losses. Now, we know that there are some RMA products, there's some NAP claims that were already paid that already had quality loss included. And so those will not be eligible for quality. And then as well as crops where production was already reduced for quality under NAP. So where that really applies is we have a couple pockets on specialty crops I can think of where there's potentially quality could have been applied. And in those instances, if they were already compensated for that quality loss under NAP, then they will not be able to now apply for that same quality loss under SDRP stage 2. Additionally, maple sap, honey, like I said, tree, bushes, and vines, any crops that were destroyed, prevented planted crops, and value loss are all ineligible for a quality loss percentage. Now, what is this quality loss percentage? It really comes down to two different avenues. One is for forage crops, and then all other crops other than forage. So for all other crops other than forage, what we're really looking at is a total loss in value based on the physical condition at the point of sale. And basically, you have an expected price, and then you have an actual price. We're going to figure out what's the percent difference between those two prices, and that will be applied as the quality loss for that specific production. Now, additionally, what's going to happen with your quality loss is it's going to be weighted against all production. So on the quality calculator, the producer is going to have to know what is the total production I had for that unit on that crop, and second, what was my quality loss on that specific production. So if I have different loads going in different days, maybe there's different quality losses, different prices that were expected and achieved. All of that has to be documented as well through verifiable records. So a producer, if they're going to have a quality loss, they have to have records that support that there was actually a loss in value. Now, the other side of it is the forage. And so forage is going to be based off a change in nutritional value. And I know that's probably not really applying so much for this call, but just to give you a basic idea of what it is, we're going to look at changes in nutritional value, and you'll have a baseline. It's maybe looking at something like RFV or TDN, and looking at how does that fall within a range that FSA has established, whether that's established at the national level or a state establishes what that range is, depending on different factors in their state of where it could be. But it's the same premise. We're going to look at a quality loss percentage applied across impacted production and weighted across all production. So this goes into further what we just talked about on the forage side. We're looking at a range for the producer. It's a change from QLA. QLA looked and based it off of a producer would have to turn in a test from the current year, and then 3 preceding years. The way the program worked is it would establish what that baseline was going to be, and then look at the current year to see if they had a quality loss. So instead of having a baseline, it's going to use these values that are established by FSA to determine where it falls in with the current year. So the producer is not having to provide numerous years for the quality. It's just that 1 year in question. And that's specific to forage crops. Now, this quality loss for stage 2, that initial deployment is right now. When this program sign-up began Monday, the quality loss was included in that. So as we go through, you'll see on the application where this comes in, but it's going to be, like I said, weighted versus total production, and it's a single percent that the producer is going to enter into the application. Now, as we indicated, stage 1 is going to be a separate enrollment anticipated for early next year. And then to prevent duplicate benefits, what we're going to do is take a look at what quality was already included for those APH and yield-based plans, and then allow a producer to come in and apply for a quality loss that might be in excess of what crop insurance would have paid. For example, crop insurance might have loss thresholds. SDRP does not have those thresholds. So this would capture that loss threshold that was ultimately not covered by crop insurance. We're going to take a look at it and then just paying on the difference. So let's just, for example, ultimately RMA paid on a 4% quality loss, and the calculator figures that it was a 6% quality loss. The program ended up paying on a 2% quality loss. But there'll be more on that to come when we get to stage 1. Now, we will have some additional calculators that are and some little different criteria that's going to be rolled out for upland cotton, small grains sold as feed, pulse crops sold as feed, sugarcane, and peanuts. These follow different carve-outs and exceptions that were provided under that prior program, which was QLA, which QLA was for losses in 18 and 19. But Well, the way we're going to roll out these calculators is first up will be cotton, peanuts would be next, and then sugarcane will be rolling out the third with those calculators. So those are calculators we're still working on, but we'll get them rolled out and posted as soon as we can. Now, as I indicated, to assist the producers with the calculation of that quality loss, there's a calculator to go through there so they don't have to try to figure out all the math. It's laid out in the handbook. It's really simple. We had a demo today for our field offices on that calculator, and they go in there, they enter minimal information, and it'll spit out the math for them so that you can see here coming up where they're going to enter that in with the application. So the first things we're going to do now is we're going to jump right into the crops. So we're going to start off with insured crops. Now, going down the application, this applies to parts C through part G. Now, part C, that's our yield-based crops. Those are the APH and yield-based plans. Now, what we've done is we've bucketed these into these different parts on the form for what fits for us. Now, you may look at these and you say, well, a value loss plan is really a dollar plan. But there's, and when I get through each one, we'll explain on why it's bucketed the way it is here. But there wasn't, and it really comes down to the type of data that is available from crop insurance and how we're able to use that data and leverage it as part of this application process. So starting off, we have the insured APH-based plans. So here's a list of the plan codes that are included here, and you can see right off the bat, you see revenue protection here. Which you may not traditionally think of as an APH yield-based plan, but these are plans that have data available where we're able to capture the SDRP liability. So that's the producer's acres times their yield times their price times their SDRP factor. And that gives us the SDRP liability. Now, their SDRP factor is determined based on the level of coverage they had. So, for example, if a producer had 65-100 coverage, the SDRP factor would be 87.5. So we're going to determine what their liability is acres times that yield times that price times that SDRP factor. Now, when we come over here and you look at the form, items 11 through 18 are really, it's a copy of what they saw on stage 1. Now remember, stage 1 is indemnified crops. Stage 2 are crops that, in this part specifically, were not indemnified. They had crop insurance. They were not indemnified for whatever reason. They had or maybe they had a shell loss. They didn't rise to the level of indemnification. So items 11 through 14 are pre-filled. That's going to be where the primary and SBI in 14 and 15, that's just a breakdown of the percentage. Percentage between, if the primary decides a percent of that really should go to the SBI, it's going to be what's that breakdown of percentage. Number 16, that's a standard agreement to purchase linkage. That's that, or purchase, crop insurance. That's that linkage question that Kathy was talking about, of having to have that 60-100 coverage. And then when you get into item 17, that's where the disaster event, that's where the applicant has to indicate what their qualifying disaster event was. Now, it's important to point out here that a producer maybe they submitted for a notice of loss and the loss adjuster came out and they ultimately determined that it was a shallow loss situation, right? They had 65-100 coverage, but I only had a 20% loss. So it didn't trigger a payment. But let's just say that the event that they applied for was hail. Well, hail is not a qualifying disaster event under SDRP. But the producer can go back and look and say, okay, was there a portion of my loss that contributed to this loss in whole or in part? And they go back and look and they say, well, there was excessive heat that occurred. And that impacted my crop. I never reported that to crop insurance, but it was something that impacted this crop and was in whole or in part caused my loss. So they can apply for that. They indicate excessive heat. And then, of course, number 18 is just the COC action. Now, where this kind of differs on the form now from how you saw it on stage 1 is this bottom half, this 19 through 27. So RMA is providing over to us the type, the practice, the unit measure, and that SDRP liability. That liability is the number I talked about of acres times yield times price times that SDRP factor. And so if a producer, especially in this section, Part C, if they have disagreements with what that liability comes out to, we have information where we can show these are the numbers that went into it. But ultimately, if they have a question on how it's should be calculated or what that number is or why is that number used, that's a question for their crop insurance agent to work through with their AIP. Now, number 23 is going to be a number that may not show up on all applications, but that is RMA producer certified production that could be the producer may have turned in for yield purposes. Now, if the producer turned that in, they could bring that over. Now, a producer could look at this with all the pre-filled information and determine, you know what, I'm good with the production that we have here. I don't think I need to turn anything else in and apply. They don't have to turn it in. You can leave 24 and 25 blank and apply as it is. Now, 24 is SDRP, producer certified production. If the producer comes in and looks at item number 23 and they're like, well, you know, there's production in there that really shouldn't be applied in this yield scenario, so I'm going to break down 24. Now the producer has to turn in acceptable production records. So those are records that are verifiable or non-verifiable, and they can work with their county office to determine what kind of records they may need in that situation. But they do have the ability to essentially override the production that RMA sends us. Now, I would want to point out that in item 23 may be blank in some cases. That's just because the agent maybe didn't turn it over to the AIP or the producer didn't turn it in. But if it was turned in and we have it, it's populated there. Now, what we talked about previously was this, what we have here in number 25 is that producer certified quality loss. So that's where a producer can look and they're going to work through that calculator, come up with one singular number that's weighted for across all production to figure out what that quality loss is. And the way it's going to work is it's going to take a look at the quality loss and essentially it reduces that production to count, whether that be if there's nothing in 24, it's based on 23. If there's something in 24, it's going to use 24. So it's going to take a look at that number and reduce the production to count to essentially pay for that quality loss. Now, kind of just to break down on what the calculation is. The standard calculation across the whole program is very simple on its face. It is what did you expect and what did you get? Now, your expectation, that's your liability, right? We're taking, that's my acres times my yield times my price, and then the coverage level or your SDRP factor, that's the expectation, that's your guarantee. Then on the other side of the equation is what did you get? So that's your production times your price. Now, what this program is doing as well is it's only compensating for the portion of loss that occurs between the coverage level and the SDRP factor. It's not compensating for the portion of loss that could have been indemnified by crop insurance or NAP, whoever it may be. So if a producer had a shallow loss, and let's just say they had 65-100 coverage. Again, we go back to the example where they had a 20% loss. This part would be a non-issue because it never would have triggered crop insurance. So if they had a shallow loss and you follow that example of the 20% loss and they had an 87.5% factor, that's really the payment's going to calculate on that 7.5%. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the liability minus the production times that reducing for that quality loss percentage times the price. That gives us our expected. Then we're going to subtract off what would potentially crop insurance would have paid. So we're not going to pay for that first 65% if they maybe the RMA denied them for some reason. So we're not going to compensate for that percent. And so what it's going to do is going to take that calculated loss minus the potential insured. If that number is greater than 0, then we're going to add back in premiums and fees. And then we're going to multiply, all of these are going to get multiplied by a 35% payment factor. So now it's going to go into what these area plans are. Now the area plans are going to be your area revenue protection, your rainfall index. That's where your programs like apiculture are going to come in. And so this one's a little bit different from others on stage 2 for the reason that the area plans may include, they do not necessarily have to have been non-indemnified. So we had situations, not really for the specialty side, but like for annual forage, where the plan was disapproved because there was acres that were ineligible on it and it couldn't be split out. So what stage 2 allows for is to split out between eligible and ineligible acreage, or ineligible and eligible crops for that matter, that are going to be split out to essentially bifurcate these SDRP payment, so it's only focusing on what is eligible. So we have here, top is still the same. It's what we just saw before. You've got the yellow that's pre-filled. The RMA is going to provide to us the number of acres that were insured, and then the producer is going to give us an acreage report, an FSA 578 of total acres. We're going to they'll be able to do a comparison between the RMA insured acres and the producer acres to figure out, okay, what is the percent that I can put in here of ultimately of this SDRP payment that it can actually be attributed to. So that payment calculation, it's a pretty simple one. It's taking that SDRP payment, which is really, and all that's doing is that SDRP calculation. It's looking at the individual insurance product is being now recalculated with that higher SDRP factor that we talked about. So if they were covered at 65% coverage, they didn't trigger for an indemnity under stage 1 because they had 65 as a 20% loss. Now it's going to be recalculated. You're going to move that 65% out. RMA is now recalculating that loss with that 87.5% coverage factor and sending that over to us. You're going to take that estimated SDRP payment times those producer certified percent of eligible acres and then multiply it against the 35% payment factor. And now if that payment, again, is greater than 0, we're going to add back in any premiums and fees. So this is just a breakdown of how that bifurcation will work. But if the eligible acres on the 578 is equal to or greater than the RMA insured acres, then the producer can certify 100% of the acreage is eligible. If the eligible acres on the 578 is less than the RMA insured acres, then the producer will have to determine the percent difference between the eligible insured acreage on the 578 compared to the RMA insured acres on the application. Now, this is an example. It's really specific to annual forage, which doesn't really apply to you all. But the basic premise of this example is it looks at the RMA insured acres, the producer's acres of eligible crop exceeds it, so that allows the producer to come in at 100% on that application. Now, I would expect that you'll have quite a few specialty crops that are going to be bucketed in this plan. These are the insured, dollar plans, and other revenue. So here's a list of those plans that are coming in on this. And so now the difference here from the APH yield base is RMA was able to provide us the left-hand side of the calculation. They could give us the acres times the yield times the price and the production, because it really was a production-driven calculation at the end of the day. These are dollar or revenue-driven calculations on the RMA side. So if RMA provides us the liability, we would then be converting on the other side to a production-based, and it wouldn't match up. So these are ones where we have gone a different direction, where RMA would calculate these one way and SDRP is calculating these a different way. So there is very minimal data that's coming over from RMA in these cases. But it's the same premise, same idea. It's going to be SDRP liability, so acres times yield times price, times that SDRP factor. The difference here, of course, the acres, the yield, and the price are coming from FSA. And that's going to be driven by the producer filing an acreage report. We're going to look and see what crop it is, what's the associated county expected yield and the price that FSA has already established for that crop. And same idea, we're going to only pay on the difference between coverage level and SDRP factor. If the producer comes through and they question any part of this calculation, where did this come from, how does liability come in, that would be a question for FSA. We send them to the agent on those. They're not going to have a whole lot of, agent's not going to know anything on that. Now, what the agent could help with is, of course, SBIs. If the SBI is not showing or an SBI should be showing, that's where the questions come in for the agents on these. Do we have questions on mismatches between data as we've had in stage 1? Those are where the questions come in for this one on the agent side. But as you can see, the pre-filled data is coming in. These top 40 through 47 is the same as what we've seen on the previous slide for the APH and yield-based. Difference is down here is the driver is the acreage report. So a producer has these, the first thing they have to do is come in and see that's here. They're going to have to file an acreage report. Once we have that acreage report on file, it's going to pull in a lot of this information, and including what that liability is, which you can't see here, but that's occurring behind the scenes. Now, same rules apply for production. The difference is RMA doesn't have any production to send to us, so the producer has to turn in production themselves. They're going to have to turn in acceptable production records to support what that number is. Same as the others, there is a quality loss that can be certified to here following the same rules as we outlined earlier. So next, we're just going to jump into the insured value loss plans, nurseries and clams. I know that when you look at these, like right here, it even says aquaculture, these are dollar plans, right? These are dollar amounts of insurance. This is how FSA bucketed them for this program. So the reason we did this is bucket these the value loss different from that dollar plan that we just talked about is because the dollar plan we just talked about, that's your crops like your green bell peppers, your tomatoes, that lend themselves to a yield calculation. When we're talking about these insured value plans, we're really talking about clams and nursery. Those are your inventory crops. They don't lend themselves to a yield calculation, how FSA handles them. So they're brought in and they're going to be handled as a value loss situation. In the value loss situation, there is no inventory or there is no quality loss, but we're looking at inventory immediately before and immediately after the disaster. So what we have here is a breakdown of what this form is going to look like. 64 through 65, that's really kind of coming from crop insurance, and that number 68 as well. Now, what you'll see here that's kind of unique to the value loss is this crop disaster event number. That is something that our system has generated. But because value loss pays on a basically by event of inventory before and immediately after the event, you can have more than one loss on an inventory during the year. So if they had, for instance, clams, the crop year runs October 1st to September 30. In November, they had a hurricane that impacted that crop. That could be event 1. Then you come through and you have some other flooding event that happens in, say, April. That would be event number 2. So there would be different inventories before and after for each of those events, and it allows them to go through and calculate it out that way. But the producer would then have to provide records to support what's my inventory before and after. That's a dollar value on what that's going to go on there. And then, of course, like the percent share of the crop, that's the percent share that's coming over from the acreage report of, if they are in a partnership with somebody, that's what that number's coming over for. Now, like we talked about this one, when you think about it, it's really the same as the yield, okay? It's what did you expect and what did you get? My expectation was my inventory before my disaster. What I got was my inventory after the disaster. So my expectation is my dollar value before times that SDRP factor. What I have left is my dollar value after. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to take a look at what would be a potential insured indemnity. take that off. If the difference between the calculated loss and the insured indemnity is greater than 0, we're going to add back in the premiums and fees. And of course, we're going to multiply that by the 35% payment factor. Now we're going to get into the NAP crops. So as Kathy indicated earlier, with NAP, we have value loss and yield. There is no tree, bush, and vine. Tree, bush, and vine is, and I know we didn't talk about that here, but there's crop insurance has trees and vines. Tree, bush, and if they have a bush, there's no insurance product for that, so that's uninsured. But NAP only covers crops or commodities. There is no tree, bush, and vine part of NAP. So NAP only has value loss and yield. And where we split the hair further is whether or not they had an application. Was that application approved, or if they didn't have an approved one? So parts H through K are covering the NAP crops and further broken down by that application for payment. So first thing we're going to do is look at value loss that has an approved application for payment. So these are ones that had a shallow loss, didn't trigger a payment under stage 1. We've now recalculated that using the higher SDRP factor, pulls over. Nothing for the producer. Only thing the producer has to do here is just indicate the agreement to purchase crop insurance or NAP and meet that linkage requirement, indicate what the disaster event was. Very low burden on the producer. They don't have to turn in any records because we're leveraging what was already turned in on the NAP side. So it's doing that, like I just said, we're taking that SDRP payment times that factor, and with that, how that's calculated, it's just recalculating that exact NAP calculation that was used with that higher SDRP factor in substitution for that coverage level. Next up is going to be the yield base with an approved application for payment. This one as well, we're going to leverage what's already in the system. So it's going to pre-pull over everything that's here in yellow. Producer has to indicate they're going to purchase crop insurance and what that disaster event was. And then you'll see down here, all of this is pulling over, and it's already pulling over the production. Now, these are the same things. These were NAP crops that had a shallow loss, but we are giving them the ability now to come back in and indicate if there was a quality loss. Now, if there is a quality loss, they have to turn in documentation in support of that quality loss. And so it's pulling over and through here. So this one's pretty simple as well. If they didn't have a quality loss, they can just go through with 113 through 114, and that's where the application, that's all they have to do here on part I. This one, because they already had an application, we don't have to take into account a potential NAP payment because that they already had a NAP application that was calculated to 0, but it's doing the same thing. It's doing expected minus the actual. So my expected is my liability, my acres times my yield times my price times that SDRP factor minus what I actually received, that's my production, minus any quality loss times that NCT price, that's times the price. Once again, if that calculates to greater than 0, we're going to add back in your premiums and fees. So next up is your yield-based crops without an approved application for payment. So this is really similar to what we just saw. Now the difference is, of course, they didn't file an application for payment, so we don't have production. Producer has to turn in production. They're following the same rules as everybody else with what they turn in, and they now have the option as well to turn in a quality loss. But we're going to leverage as much data as we have based on what's on file. They may or may not have an acreage report, but we're going to leverage their NAP approved yield as well. So if they had an approved yield on file, or maybe it hasn't been kept up, they'll need to get that caught back up on the NAP side, and that's the yield that we're going to utilize in this calculation. So it's the same thing as what we've talked about, except this one, because they didn't have an application for payment on file, we need to make sure that we're not accounting for what NAP could have paid. So it's taking the calculated loss minus that potential NAP payment. If that's greater than 0, add back in service fees and premiums. And then next, we have the NAP value loss without an approved application for payment. So this is largely going to be the same as what kind of we talked about, except now just transfer what we talked about in yield into the value loss. Producer is going to have to give us records to support what was my dollar value before the disaster, what was my dollar value after the disaster. We're going to take those, run through the same calculation that we talked about on that insured value loss side, but it's going to be that value before times my SDRP factor minus my value after. Take that calculated loss, subtract off any potential net payment if greater than zero, add back in that service fees and premiums. All right, the home stretch here, the uninsured APH and yield-based crops. So your uninsured APH and yield-based crops, it really looks almost the exact same as what we talked about for your dollar plans or your NAP with no approved application for payment. You can see that they look very similar. Now, of course, if you compare it to the dollar, you don't have the primary and SBIs up here, but they still have to come through and make their agreement to crop insurance or NAP, to purchase crop insurance or NAP. What is their disaster event? This is going to be pre-filled, and the producer turns in production and what potentially for if they had a quality loss. Now, it's important that here on the insured and uninsured, that we talked about this earlier, that there is a difference between uninsured and uncoverable. Your uncoverable acres are, for instance, producer had pecans. First year, those pecans were not covered. That's uncoverable acres. Those cannot be pulled in. But let's also take that producer. They had pecans in 2 counties. They only covered them in 1 county. Maybe the insurance wasn't offered in the other and they just didn't take out NAP in that other county. Those are uninsured acres in that other county. So those can now be covered. Now we're going to follow the same rules on those uninsured as maybe NAP does. So if they were first year in there, those wouldn't be covered, may not be covered as well. But there is that, that split, that line between uncoverable and uninsured acres. So there is that difference. But when the producer gets in here, the premise is still the same. They're going to just turn in their production and their acres. Now, for the uninsured, they may not be customers of FSA. So the first thing they have to do is get established with FSA, establish their farm records, and then file that acreage report, because this form will not populate anything for them until they have that acreage report in file. So they have to do that acreage report first. Now, the calculation here is the same as what we talked about for the NAP and the dollar value. Now, the difference is this SDRP factor of 70%. For the uninsured, the statute specifies that uncovered or uninsured crops cannot have a factor greater than 70%. Now, could have gone lower, but it can't go greater. So they're capped at 70% for the uninsured. Now, the thing too is they're going to get that entire payment. We don't have to worry about that potential calculated payment like we did on the crop insurance or NAP side. So you're going to take the acres times the yield times the price times that SDRP factor. All of this is done based on data that either the producer is turning into FSA through their acreage report or production records. So everything is done right there in the office. And of course, since they're not covered, there is no premiums and fees. So it's just taking that calculated loss times that 35% factor. The next is the uninsured value loss. There's really no different here than the NAP value loss without an application for payment. It's going to give us, we're going to have minimal information that we have. Producer's going to turn in acceptable records before and after the disaster. And we're going to use the same calculation, except that SDRP factor is again going to be 70%. So with that concludes our presentation. I know that was fast and furious, and I'm sure we have some questions here in the chat to address, but I'm going to turn it back over to Jamie or Kathy for any closing remarks.
Thank you, Chris. I don't see any questions in the Q&A right now. But if you do have questions, make sure you submit them to us and we'll make sure to get them added to our Q&A document that's posted on the SDRP website. We really appreciate you connecting today and listening to the presentation. I know that with specialty crop growers, the revenue program that we operated under ERP Phase 2 and Track 2 for 20 and 21 and 22 was popular with some and not so popular with others. So based on feedback, we moved to this yield-based product. One of the biggest questions that we have from specialty crop growers or maybe concerns with this program is that it will take a lot longer to apply. But as you can tell with the presentation that Chris just made, we are utilizing all of the data that's already on file when possible with every type of application. And those that have not filed acreage reports or provided production evidence, things like that, prior to the program being announced, will have that opportunity now. And we hope that it's being simplified with this program. While the revenue-based model was inclusive of the entire loss, this one being computed on and calculated on an individual crop basis, it could potentially result in the opportunity to receive a disaster payment where you didn't before. Because one, let's say you had squash and cucumbers, and your squash made a bumper crop, it would override the loss that you had on your cucumber crop. So, with this program, there is an opportunity that you may be able to qualify for additional dollars that you didn't before. Now, of course, the opposite could occur as well. But if you have any concerns or any questions, or if there are just issues that you're having with understanding the application process, make sure that you do reach out to your county offices. Like Chris and Jamie and Bill have all said, the county offices and state offices have all been trained. We've provided them multiple tools and will continue to do so. But we want to hear that feedback. And the best way to do that is to filter that up through the county and state office. And then we will get whatever tools that we can out there to assist you with the application process. So with that, I'm going to say a big thank you. And I don't see any questions added to the Q&A. So we hope everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you.